The crowd is roaring in the heat of the 1994 World Cup. Maradona is back. Our GOAT is back. The unstoppable is here. Against Greece, he smashes a thunderbolt wild shot into the net. Then he turns, sprinting straight at the camera. His eyes grew wild, veins popping, screaming with a fury the world had not seen in years. That moment feels like resurrection. The fallen genius is reborn. Argentina believes. The world believes. But behind that manic celebration is a secret. A secret that will break not just the World Cup, but Maradona himself. Within days, the test results arrive. He was ephedrine positive. He got banned without hesitation. He was thrown out of the tournament, paraded in front of the public, humiliated and disgraced. His teammates were stunned. His fans felt betrayed. The man who once lifted nations is now escorted out of the game like a criminal. For many, it feels sudden. A shocking fall, a hero destroyed overnight. But for those who had been watching closely, this was no surprise. His body, his mind, his soul had been under siege for years. Drugs, pressure, fame, and demons had already done their work. This is not the story of a failed drug test. This is the story of how Maradona's career truly ended, long before the final whistle ever blew. Villa Fiorito. A place where the streets were more dirt than pavement, where kids played barefoot, and where hunger was never far away. That was Diego's world. The house he grew up in was a tiny shack with no running water. His father worked long hours doing construction jobs, patching together enough pesos to keep the family afloat. His mother often went hungry so her children could eat. And when Diego was too young to understand sacrifice, she would hide her empty plate and insist she was full. It was in this place of scarcity that Diego found his escape. A ball, any ball. Sometimes it was leather, sometimes it was plastic, sometimes it was just rolled up rags tied with string. But once it was at his feet, everything else disappeared. By the age of 10, he wasn't just another kid kicking around on dusty streets. He was magic. He would juggle endlessly, the ball glued to him, a smile on his face, as if the world finally made sense. People in Villa Fiorito called him different. By 12, he was entertaining crowds at halftime shows, stepping onto real pitches to juggle in front of thousands who could not believe what they were seeing. A small boy with oversized curls, controlling the ball as if it were alive. He wasn't just playing, he was performing, feeding off every gasp, every cheer. Argentina had found its child prodigy. He became El Pibe de Oro, the Golden Boy. At Argentinos Juniors, his gift was undeniable. Coaches would talk about his vision, his left foot, his hunger to prove himself. But there was something else too, fame. It came fast, too fast. Diego was still a teenager when his name was already in headlines. Reporters waited outside his home, strangers stopped him in the streets. Cameras followed him before he even had the chance to grow into himself. In Argentina, football was not a sport. It was survival, politics, pride, identity. And Diego, barely 15, was expected to carry all of it. That kind of pressure doesn't just shape a player, it consumes him. The boy who once played barefoot in Villa Fiorito was now a national obsession. Every kick, every touch, every goal meant more than the game itself. And while his talent looked unstoppable, his environment was quietly planting seeds of danger. The money, the attention, the adoration of millions. It was intoxicating. And for a kid who grew up with nothing, it was impossible to resist. The Golden Boy was not just a rising star. He was becoming a myth before his career had even truly begun. And myths don't live ordinary lives. The dream move came in 1981, Boca Juniors. For Diego, it wasn't just about football. It was about home. Boca represented the passion of the poor, the voice of those who came from nothing. When he walked onto La Bombonera's pitch, he wasn't just wearing a jersey. He was carrying the weight of Villa Fiorito, the neighborhoods, the kids who still played barefoot in the dust. His goals, his dribbles, his genius felt like a victory for all of them. The Golden Boy belonged to his people, but Europe was calling. Barcelona signed him for a world record fee. Suddenly Diego was in Spain, dazzling crowds with his brilliance. He scored goals that seemed impossible, humiliating defenders, making stadiums gasp. Yet, it was never smooth. Injuries kept him out for months. A hepatitis scare weakened his body. And outside the pitch, temptation found him. The nightlife of Barcelona became part of his world. It was there, in the shadows of clubs and parties, where he first brushed with cocaine. What seemed like a minor indulgence at the time would slowly become his greatest enemy. By 1984, Barcelona had grown tired of the chaos. Diego needed a new chapter, and then came Napoli. The day he arrived, 75,000 fans packed the San Paolo Stadium just to see him unveiled. No ball, no match, just Diego waving in a sky blue jersey. To Naples, he wasn't just a footballer, he was salvation. The city was despised by the wealthy north of Italy, mocked as dirty, poor, and hopeless. But now, they had Maradona. Their answer to the insults. Their chance to fight back with the one thing Italy loved most: football. The gamble paid off. Diego transformed Napoli from underdogs into giants. He dragged them to titles the city had never dreamed of. He delivered 2 Serie A championships, a UEFA Cup, and eternal pride. Every time he stepped on the pitch, he carried Naples on his shoulders. And Naples carried him in return, treating him like a god. Murals of his face rose on buildings, songs were written in his name. To them, he wasn't Maradona anymore, he was San Diego. And then came Mexico, 1986, the World Cup that would seal his myth forever. Against England, the two sides of Diego were revealed in one match. First, the infamous Hand of God, a cheeky punch that fooled the referee and enraged the world. Minutes later, the goal of the century, a slalom through half the English team that looked like something from another universe. He lifted Argentina to glory almost single-handedly. By the time he held that trophy aloft, Maradona was no longer just a player. He was a legend. A boy from Villa Fiorito had conquered the world. But at the height of his glory, the cracks were already there. The nightlife, the drugs, the endless pressure. His rise was breathtaking. His fall was only a matter of time. Naples gave Maradona everything: fame, love, protection, and in return, he gave the city its greatest pride. But behind the cheers and trophies, another life was unfolding. A darker one. The cocaine he first touched in Barcelona was no longer an occasional escape. In Naples, it became a routine. Nights blurred into mornings. The parties grew louder. Prostitutes, alcohol, drugs. The city adored him on Sunday afternoons when he danced across the pitch. But in the nights between, he was sinking. Napoli's rise had also caught the attention of the Camorra, the local mafia. They controlled everything in the city, clubs, restaurants, even police favors. And soon, they controlled Maradona too. They shielded him from the press. They kept his secrets quiet. They supplied his vices and made sure no scandal touched him. For years, they were his silent bodyguards, making problems disappear. But problems always come back. His addiction made training harder. His fitness dropped. Coaches tried to cover for him. Teammates protected him. The city worshipped him too much to let the truth come out. He was still their savior, the man who had lifted them above Italy's sneers. Yet the cracks were spreading. Then came 1990. Italy hosted the World Cup. For most of the country, the dream was simple: win on home soil. For Naples, there was a different dream. Their hero was not wearing the blue of Italy, but the sky blue of Argentina. When Argentina faced Italy in the semi-finals, the entire country turned on Maradona. Everywhere, he was hated. Everywhere except Naples. In that city, thousands supported Argentina instead of their own national team, all because of him. Italy lost, Argentina advanced, and Maradona was blamed. Overnight, he became the villain of Italian football. The love from Naples remained, but everywhere else, he was despised. His empire was crumbling. The mafia ties deepened. The parties grew darker. The police began to circle. Cocaine was no longer just a private escape. It was a dependency. His body showed it. His performances wavered. His face looked older, heavier, worn. And still Napoli tried to shield him. They needed him. The fans needed him. He was too important to expose. But secrets cannot be protected forever. The authorities had their eyes on him. The mafia could not cover every trace. By the early 1990s, the weight of his choices, drugs, crime, endless pressure was pressing harder than any defender he had ever faced. On the pitch, he was still capable of brilliance. Off it, his life was spiraling out of control. The balance between God and mortal was slipping, and the world was about to see it all collapse. By 1991, the cracks could no longer be hidden. After years of whispers, Maradona finally tested positive for cocaine while at Napoli. The result was public, humiliating, impossible to cover up. 15 months banned from the game he loved. For a man who lived only through football, it felt like exile. Napoli's hero was suddenly disgraced. The city that had once worshipped him painted over murals, tore down posters, and tried to distance itself from the scandal. Back in Buenos Aires, the collapse became even more brutal. Police raided a party and found drugs. Maradona, once the face of Argentina, was dragged out in front of flashing cameras. The world watched as the Golden Boy was now paraded like a criminal. It was no longer about goals or genius. It was about his downfall, his addictions, his shame. The myth that had carried him for so long was beginning to rot. Still, Diego refused to let go. He trained. He talked of comebacks. He wanted redemption. But his body was heavier, his legs slower, his spirit weaker. Every step back onto the pitch was harder than the one before. The world had moved on, yet he could not. Football had always been his oxygen, and without it he was suffocating. Then came 1994, the World Cup in the United States. Maradona saw it as his last chance to remind the world who he was. He arrived leaner, sharper, a shadow of his old brilliance flickering back to life. Against Greece, he smashed a thunderbolt into the top corner. He ran to the camera, screaming, eyes wide, veins bursting. It was raw, manic, unforgettable. For a moment, it looked like resurrection. Argentina believed again. The world believed again. But the joy didn't last. Just days later, his test results came back. Ephedrine banned. He was thrown out of the tournament. Cameras caught him being escorted away, his hand in that of a nurse, his face frozen in disbelief. To the outside world, it was sudden, a hero cut down in an instant. But for those who had followed closely, it was years in the making. The dream of redemption was gone. The World Cup was meant to be his curtain call, his final proof that he was still El Pibe de Oro. Instead, it became the stage of his collapse. The man who once lifted Argentina to glory was now humiliated in front of the world. This was not just the end of a tournament. This was the end of Maradona as a player. His genius would live forever, but his career, his myth as an unstoppable force, died in the summer of 1994. After the humiliation of 1994, Maradona tried to return to the only place that ever felt like home, Boca Juniors. The stadium shook when he walked back onto the pitch, but something had changed. The genius was still there in flashes. The touch, the vision, the left foot that could bend time. Yet the body was slower, heavier. The mistakes came more often. The magic was no longer enough to hide the decline. Missed penalties followed. More drug tests followed. Each comeback was shorter than the last. The world was watching a man fight, not just defenders, but his own body. And it was a fight he could not win. In 1997, at 37 years old, Diego played his final match for Boca. He chose to retire on his birthday. It was the end of a career that had burned brighter and collapsed harder than almost any other in the history of sports. The Golden Boy was no longer a player. He was a man looking for a life after football. That life was chaotic. He tried coaching, but it was erratic. One job ended after a single game, another after a few weeks. His passion was real, but his discipline was gone. Off the pitch, things were even worse. His health spiraled, weight ballooned, then shrank. After gastric bypass surgery, his heart failed him more than once. Lawsuits piled up, old scandals resurfaced. The genius of the pitch had become a magnet for controversy. And yet, people never stopped loving him. Crowds still followed him everywhere. Journalists still asked for every quote. Young players still called him their hero. He was no longer the golden boy, but he was still Maradona. Larger than life, impossible to ignore. In 2020, the story finally ended. Maradona died of a heart attack at 60 years old. Argentina went into mourning. Millions poured into the streets. His coffin was draped in the flag. Fans wept outside the presidential palace as if a head of state had passed. For 3 days, a country grieved a man who was never just a player. But even in death, the debate remained. To some, he was a god, a man who carried the poor on his back, who lifted Naples from mockery to glory, who gave Argentina its proudest footballing moment. To others, he was a tragedy, a genius destroyed by his own excess, by drugs, by pressure, by the weight of being more than human. Maybe he was both. A boy from Villa Fiorito who rose too high, too fast, and burned out in front of the world. Maradona's career ended long before his life did, but his myth, in all its beauty and all its darkness, will never end. Maradona's career did not end in one single moment. It ended piece by piece. With every sleepless night, with every scandal splashed across headlines, with every line of cocaine that pulled him further away from the game that made him immortal. By the time the 1994 test came back, the truth was already written. That was not the fall. That was the confirmation. The collapse had begun years earlier, hidden in shadows, ignored by those who needed his genius too much to stop him. And yet, he remains untouchable. Not because he was flawless, but because he was human in a way very few legends allow themselves to be. He was glory and destruction, discipline and chaos, a savior and a sinner, all in one man. When he lifted the ball, it felt like he carried entire nations. When he fell, it felt like the world fell with him. Maradona showed us what happens when talent burns brighter than the body or soul can contain. He was never meant to be ordinary. He was meant to be unforgettable. His career ended long before his life did, but his story never will. For some, he will always be the boy from Villa Fiorito who rose from nothing. For others, he will be the flawed man who wasted too much. In truth, he was both. And that is why Maradona is eternal.